The day had arrived. It was a crisp morning in May, the air carrying with it a slight chill that seemed out of place in the bustling city of Rome. Donald Trump, the sitting president of the United States, had just concluded a series of high-stakes meetings with European leaders discussing trade agreements, NATO policies, and global security. But today, something unusual was on the horizon. He had received an invitation from none other than the newly elected Pope Robert Prevost, who had taken the name Leo XIV upon his elevation to the papacy. It had been just days since the unexpected death of Pope Francis, and the Vatican was still reeling from the shock. The eyes of the world were on the tiny country-state as they waited to see what direction the Church would take under the leadership of the new pontiff. Few had expected the quick and decisive election of Robert Prevost, who had a reputation for being quiet, reserved, and more focused on practical matters than on the public spotlight. Trump, known for his larger-than-life persona, wasn't particularly known for his religious fervor. But his advisors had suggested this private meeting, understanding the significance of the new pope's election in the global political landscape. "It's a good opportunity, sir," they had said. "The world is watching how both of you will shape the future of international relations." Trump had his own reservations about the meeting. After all, he was a businessman and a politician, not a theologian. But the opportunity to engage with the most powerful religious leader in the world was one he couldn't ignore. As a devout Catholic, Prevost had quickly garnered attention for his thoughtful approach to church reform, his advocacy for humanitarian issues, and his calls for unity in a divided world. As Trump's motorcade snaked through the streets of Vatican City, he reflected on the sudden shift in the global religious landscape. The media had been quick to highlight the new pope's conservative values and his firm stance on issues like family values, abortion, and immigration, issues that were close to Trump's heart. Yet, there was an undeniable curiosity surrounding the man who had been chosen to succeed Francis. Trump had always prided himself on being able to read people. He believed in the power of a handshake, the subtle nuances in a conversation, and the art of negotiation. But this was different. He had never met a pope before, let alone one who was so new to the position. He wondered what kind of man Robert Prevost really was. Arriving at the Vatican, Trump was greeted by a small but significant group of dignitaries, members of the Vatican's Curia, and several close advisors to the new pope. The air was heavy with anticipation as Trump made his way through the halls of the Apostolic Palace, his footsteps echoing in the centuries-old corridors. The presence of centuries of history weighed heavily on him, but he was here for one thing and one thing only: to meet the new pope. The doors to the private papal library opened, and there, sitting at a small, simple wooden desk, was Pope Robert Prevost. Unlike the elaborate ceremonial robes of his predecessor, Prevost wore a simple white cassock, his face calm but serious. His eyes, however, were warm, offering a contrast to the austere surroundings. "Mr. President," the Pope said with a slight nod. "It's an honor to meet you." Trump, ever the businessman, extended his hand and offered a firm shake. "Pope Prevost," he said with a grin, "it's a pleasure. I've heard a lot of good things about you." Prevost smiled gently. "I appreciate the kind words. Please have a seat." Trump sat across from the Pope, the room filling with a sense of expectation. He had no idea where this conversation would go, but he knew one thing: this meeting was about more than just formalities. It was about shaping the future of faith, of politics, and of global relations. "Mr. President," Pope Prevost began, his tone soft but resolute, "I understand that your leadership, like mine, is one marked by controversy and challenges. Yet it is also a responsibility, one that transcends politics, faith, and ideology. We must ask ourselves what kind of world we want to build." Trump leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the Pope's directness. "You've got that right. It's a mess out there. People are divided and the world's a mess. But we have to make decisions. Strong ones." Prevost's gaze softened. "Indeed. But we must also remember that decisions made in haste can cause suffering. I believe that the role of leadership is not only to act but to listen to the suffering of the people, to the cries of the poor, to the needs of those who are left behind." Trump paused, taking in the words. He had always believed in decisive leadership, in acting quickly to solve problems. But what Prevost was saying resonated in a way he didn't expect. It wasn't about quick action, it was about understanding the full scope of the consequences of those actions. "I get that," Trump said, leaning back in his chair. "But sometimes you've got to do what's best for the country, especially when there's so much pressure." Pope Prevost nodded. "The Church has always stood for those who are oppressed. But we must also ask ourselves what kind of legacy we want to leave behind. Will our actions bring peace, or will they sow discord? The words hung in the air, and Trump found himself contemplating the deeper meaning behind the Pope's gentle challenge. It wasn't just about politics, it was about morality, about legacy, about the long-term effects of the decisions they made. He had built his career on boldness, on doing what others wouldn't, on shaking up the status quo. But here, sitting across from the Pope, he realized there might be more to leadership than he had considered. "So, what do you think we should do?" Trump asked, genuinely curious. The Pope smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. "Perhaps the answer lies in humility, Mr. President. In listening more than speaking, and in seeking the common good." Trump was quiet for a moment, processing the Pope's words. He had expected a more traditional religious lecture, but this was different. This was a call to think beyond the political sphere, to think about the greater good of humanity. The silence in the room was thick, as if both men were waiting for the weight of the conversation to settle before moving forward. Trump, who was known for his quick thinking and even quicker speech, found himself pausing, searching for the right words. This meeting was turning out to be nothing like the one he had anticipated. The usual political posturing, the tactical maneuvering, none of it felt appropriate here. Pope Prevost, for his part, sat in quiet patience, his hands clasped in front of him. His calm demeanor seemed to suggest that he was not looking for a confrontation but a deeper dialogue. In the moment, Trump realized that despite their differences in positions, one as the leader of a political superpower, the other as the spiritual leader of millions, they shared something profound, a responsibility to lead, to heal, and to leave behind a legacy for the next generation. Trump took a deep breath and, in a tone less forceful than usual, spoke. "You know, I've built everything I have on the idea of strength, strong policies, strong borders, strong economy. People want someone who can stand up for them, someone who can win. But it's also about making America strong again, right? Not just physically or economically, but morally. It's a big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing." The Pope listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "Strength, Mr. President, is not only about dominance or power. It is also about the strength to carry others when they are weak, to serve those in need, and to seek justice for the downtrodden." Trump's eyes narrowed, a familiar fire sparked in him, but it wasn't anger, this was more contemplative. He knew there was wisdom in the Pope's words. After all, his own presidency had been built on the idea of giving power back to the people, of making America a beacon of strength in the world. But could that strength be reconciled with the Pope's call for justice and humility? "You're right," Trump said, his voice quieter now. "But there are different kinds of strength, right? You can't be strong if you let others walk all over you, or if you allow yourself to be weak in the face of adversity. I've faced more than my fair share of adversity, and I can tell you, the world respects strength. But I think the people also want someone who cares, someone who's tough but still has a heart." Pope Prevost smiled gently, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "And I believe that you do care, Mr. President. But perhaps the true test of strength is not in how you stand tall in the face of opposition, but in how you use your strength to raise others up. True power comes from lifting up the vulnerable, ensuring that the poor and the marginalized are not left behind. That is the strength of God's love." Trump's lips pressed together as he digested the Pope's words. The rhetoric of his own campaign had always revolved around toughness, be it on illegal immigration, trade, or foreign policy. The idea that strength could be measured by how much you gave, not just how much you took, was something that hadn't really crossed his mind in such a way. But here it was, laid out plainly before him. The Pope's voice broke through his reverie. "The world is changing rapidly. We are seeing divisions everywhere, political, social, economic. The poor are suffering, the environment is at risk, and violence is rampant. A new kind of leadership is needed, one that transcends borders, ideologies, and faiths." Trump looked at the Pope, a little surprised at how direct the conversation had become. The new pontiff wasn't pulling punches, he was speaking plainly and passionately about the issues that had consumed the world's headlines. "I agree," Trump replied slowly. "Things are broken. I've always said it, Washington is a mess, the world is a mess. I've been trying to fix that, but it's not easy. It feels like everyone is in their own corner, not listening to each other." Pope Prevost nodded, his expression serious now. "Yes, division is the enemy. Not only in politics but also within our hearts. We must ask ourselves, what is it that unites us rather than divides us? And in that unity, can we find a way to move forward?" Trump shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing in concentration. This was not the type of conversation he was accustomed to. Most of his dealings had been straightforward, transactional, but this was different. This was philosophical, even spiritual. He had always thought of himself as a practical man, someone who dealt with issues directly with little room for abstractions. Yet, here he was, listening to the Pope of the Catholic Church, a man who had dedicated his life to service and faith, speak of unity and compassion in a way that stirred something deep within him. You think it's that simple? Trump asked, his voice tinged with skepticism but not hostility. I mean, don't you think it's a little naive to think that just talking about unity can solve the world's problems? Look at the way people are fighting over religion, race, power. It's a mess. Pope Prevost's gaze softened and he leaned forward slightly. No, Mr. President, I don't think it's simple. I think it's difficult. But that does not mean it's impossible. The struggle for peace, justice, and love requires effort, sacrifice, and, above all, humility. The world's problems are deep and complex, but solutions begin with understanding one another, listening before speaking, acting with compassion before asserting dominance. It is a long road, but it starts with a single step. The Pope's words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and Trump found himself at a crossroads. He had always been a man of bold action, of taking immediate and often forceful steps to achieve his goals. But the Pope was suggesting a different approach, one that involved listening, reflecting, and, most importantly, showing humility. He wasn't sure what to make of it all. He wasn't sure if he agreed with everything the Pope was saying, but he knew one thing: the Pope was challenging him. Not just as a politician, but as a man. Trump looked down at his hands, trying to gather his thoughts. The quiet between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of reflection, a moment that felt like it could shift something deep within him. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter than before. You really believe in this? In what you're saying? I mean, it's not just about being nice, right? It's about getting things done. Pope Prevost smiled softly, almost knowingly. It's about both, Mr. President. It's about being strong enough to make hard decisions, but wise enough to do so with love in your heart. Trump exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in his chest. He had come here thinking this meeting would be more about politics, more about maneuvering and positioning. But now, as he sat across from Pope Robert Prevost, he realized it was about something much bigger. The conversation hung between them like a heavy curtain that was yet to be drawn back. For a brief moment, Donald Trump felt a strange unease, not from discomfort with the Pope, but from the realization that the conversation was veering into territory he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about power or politics anymore. It was about something more foundational: humanity itself. Trump, who had spent decades in the cutthroat world of business and politics, suddenly found himself questioning his approach. Was he truly doing what was best for the world? Was his leadership making a difference, or was it merely shifting the pieces of the chessboard without ever addressing the deeper issues beneath? Pope Prevost, sensing the shift in Trump's demeanor, broke the silence. Mr. President, I know this is a lot to take in. The world is deeply divided, and our roles as leaders can often make us feel isolated, like we are standing on separate islands. But in truth, we are all bound together. The people we serve, the earth beneath our feet, the air we breathe, they are all connected. Trump nodded, though part of him struggled to grasp the full weight of the Pope's words. He had always believed that the strength of a nation lay in its ability to assert itself, to stand firm in its beliefs, and to protect its interests at all costs. But Prevost's words seemed to suggest that true power came from unity, from acknowledging the interconnectedness of all people regardless of their race, religion, or nationality. There's a lot of talk these days about nationalism, Trump said, his voice careful but firm. I've always believed in putting America first. It's why I ran for president. The world doesn't respect weakness, and America needed a leader who would stand tall and protect its interests. But he hesitated, considering his next words. But I also know that the world is changing. You can't ignore the way things are shifting. People are angry, frustrated, and afraid. They see the elites pulling the strings while they're left to fend for themselves. Pope Prevost leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady and kind. The anger you speak of is real. It's not just in America, it's everywhere. People feel unheard, forgotten. They want leaders who will give them a voice, who will show them they are valued. But nationalism, when taken to an extreme, can fuel division, fear, and hatred. It can close doors instead of opening them. Trump's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He had always been a defender of American exceptionalism, and the notion of opening doors to the world had always felt, to him, like a risk, a weakness that could compromise national security. But in the presence of the Pope, it felt different. Perhaps for the first time, he was considering a broader perspective. I get what you're saying, Trump replied, his tone thoughtful. But it's hard to balance what's best for your country with what's best for the world. And when you're facing a divided nation, you can't just open the doors and hope for the best. You have to be strategic. You have to protect your own people first. Otherwise, who's going to do it? The Pope nodded slowly, understanding the complexity of the issue. I agree that the welfare of one's own people is important, Mr. President. But let me ask you this, if we close ourselves off completely, if we focus only on our own needs, how can we expect the world to change? How can we expect peace, prosperity, and love to grow if we never allow others in? The Church believes in the dignity of every person, regardless of their background, and that includes those who seek refuge, those who are poor, those who are marginalized. Trump was quiet for a moment, processing the Pope's words. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about these issues before, but hearing them articulated so clearly and by someone of such immense moral authority made him reconsider his stance in a way he hadn't expected. But what about the security risks? Trump asked. You know as well as I do that the world isn't exactly a safe place right now. Terrorism, economic instability, crime, it's all out there. You can't ignore that. Pope Prevost's expression softened. I don't ignore it, Mr. President. But security must be balanced with compassion. The Church has always believed that true security comes from justice, from ensuring that all people, rich and poor, citizen and refugee, are given the opportunity to live in peace. Protection isn't just about borders and walls. It's about hearts and minds. It's about building a world where people don't feel the need to turn to violence because they have no other option. Trump looked down at his hands, his mind racing. It was difficult to reconcile the idea of open borders with the protection of a nation. He had built his presidency on the idea of protecting American interests first and foremost. And yet, the Pope's words planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Could there be a way to balance security and compassion? Could he find a path forward that didn't compromise the safety of his people but also recognized the shared humanity of others? I can't say I have all the answers, Trump said finally, looking up at the Pope. But I've always believed in finding a solution no matter how tough it is. Maybe there's something in what you're saying that I need to think about. Pope Prevost smiled, a warm, understanding smile. That is all I ask, Mr. President. The questions are difficult and the answers are not easy. But they begin with a willingness to listen, to consider the perspectives of others and to recognize that our actions have consequences beyond our borders. Trump exhaled, a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of the conversation. The room felt quiet, almost reverent, as if both men were standing on the edge of something profound. I'll think about it, Trump said, his voice soft. I'll take what you said to heart. The meeting, which had begun as a diplomatic courtesy, had taken on a much deeper and more personal tone than either man had anticipated. Donald Trump, who had always prided himself on being a decisive, no-nonsense leader, found himself in a rare moment of introspection. He had come to the meeting expecting more of the usual political talk, trade agreements, global alliances, maybe even a bit of grandstanding. Instead, what he received was a challenge to his very approach to leadership. Pope Prevost, the new pontiff, had a way of drawing out the complexities in issues Trump had long considered black and white. And despite his usual resistance to such philosophical musings, Trump couldn't deny the subtle shift in his thinking. There was an unmistakable urgency in the Pope's words. A sense that the world was at a crossroads and that leaders, regardless of their nationality, could either contribute to a culture of division and fear, or they could help build a new foundation rooted in compassion and solidarity. As much as Trump tried to resist, he felt the weight of the Pope's message settle in his mind. It was a call to action, one that seemed almost impossible to ignore. So, what happens next? Trump asked, breaking the silence. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was heavy. What do you think we should do in practical terms? We're talking about unity, compassion, and all that, but the world isn't going to change overnight. I need something more concrete. What can I do? The Pope paused, considering Trump's question. It wasn't a question he was unfamiliar with. As the leader of the Catholic Church, he had spent much of his life trying to reconcile faith with the messy realities of the world. Politics, he knew, was often about compromise. But true leadership, as he saw it, was about more than just political maneuvering. It was about creating a vision, a higher calling, and inspiring others to follow. I believe the first step, Mr. President, Pope Prevost said slowly, is to embrace the idea that leadership is not just about power. It is about service. The great leaders of history were not those who built empires, but those who uplifted others, who saw the potential in every human being. You have the power to shape the future of the world, but that power should be wielded with the understanding that it must benefit not just the powerful, but the weak, the poor, and the oppressed. Trump furrowed his brow, processing the Pope's words. Service. It wasn't a word he often associated with his leadership style. He had built his career on the idea of success through strength, through dominance, through doing what it took to win. But what the Pope was suggesting was a shift in perspective. It wasn't about winning, but about creating a better world, one where every person had a chance to thrive, not just the privileged few. "I get that," Trump said, his voice tinged with thoughtfulness. "But the reality is, people don't just want to feel good. They want to see results. They want to know that their lives are better off because of what we do." The Pope nodded. "That is true, Mr. President. But results come not just from policies, but from the way those policies are implemented with dignity, with respect for human life, and with the well-being of the most vulnerable in mind. True success is not just about numbers or power, but about the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind." Trump exhaled, leaning back in his chair. The Pope's words weren't easy to digest. They required him to think about his legacy in a way he never had before, not just in terms of political victories, but in terms of humanity's greater good. Could he, the brash, unapologetic businessman turned president, truly adopt this vision? Could he lead with both strength and compassion, balancing the needs of his people with the broader needs of the world? "You make it sound easy," Trump said with a faint, wry smile. "But I don't think the world works that way. People are always going to fight, always going to have different interests, different opinions. You can't just wave a magic wand and expect everything to be fine." The Pope smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "I am not suggesting it will be easy. It will require great effort and perhaps great sacrifice. But it is the only path toward lasting peace. Think of it like this. Every act of compassion, every decision made with the intention of serving others, adds to the building blocks of a more just world." Trump stared at the Pope for a moment, his expression inscrutable. The Pope wasn't offering him a quick fix. He wasn't suggesting that all the problems of the world could be solved with a few simple gestures. What he was offering was a vision that required patience, humility, and, above all, a deep sense of responsibility. "You really believe that?" Trump asked, his voice quieter than before. "That's serving others, lifting people up? That's the key?" Pope Prevost nodded solemnly. "I do. Leadership is not about taking, it is about giving. It is about recognizing the humanity in others and knowing that their suffering is your suffering. When you lift someone else, you lift yourself." Trump looked down, his mind whirring. It was almost too much to process. The world he had inhabited, one of power, money, and influence, felt so far removed from this idea of selfless service. Yet, there was something undeniably compelling about the Pope's vision. Something that tugged at him in a way few things had before. "And what about your church?" Trump asked, shifting the focus slightly. "You're talking about compassion, unity, and peace, but there's a lot of division within your own ranks. The scandals, the struggles. How do you reconcile that?" The Pope's face grew solemn, but his voice remained steady. "The church is not perfect, Mr. President. It is made up of flawed human beings, just like any other institution. But the church's mission remains the same: to bring hope to the hopeless, to be a beacon of light in a world full of darkness. Even when we falter, we must continue to strive toward that goal." Trump nodded slowly. It was a humbling answer, one that reminded him that even the most powerful institutions were not immune to flaws and failures. Yet, there was a steadfastness in the Pope's words, an unwavering commitment to a higher calling, despite the challenges. "So what now?" Trump asked again, this time with a sense of resolution. "How do we move forward? What's the next step?" Pope Prevost smiled once more, his eyes filled with hope. "The next step, Mr. President, is to begin with yourself, to reflect on your actions and the impact they have on others. From there, you can begin to build a new kind of leadership, one that is rooted in compassion, justice, and love. And then, together, we can work toward building a world where those values are not just ideals but realities." Trump sat back, his mind racing. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertain. But it wasn't a bad uncertainty. It was the kind of uncertainty that comes when you realize you might be on the verge of something important. The conversation between President Donald Trump and Pope Robert Prevost had stretched on for hours, each word weaving together the intricacies of politics, humanity, and faith. What had started as a formal meeting between two of the world's most powerful men had transformed into a profound dialogue that neither would forget. As the day drew to a close and the sun began to set over the Vatican gardens, Trump found himself staring out the window, lost in thought. For so long, his worldview had been shaped by the hard realities of business and politics, by a belief in transactional relationships, the pursuit of power, and the protection of his people at all costs. The idea of service, compassion, and sacrifice had always seemed abstract to him, ideals that sounded noble in speeches, but were difficult to apply to the cutthroat world of governance. But as he stood there, his back turned to the Pope, Trump couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. The world was changing, and maybe it was time for him to change with it. The Pope had been clear. True leadership wasn't just about power or control, it was about service. And while Trump wasn't ready to discard his core beliefs about strength and security, he was beginning to see that there was room for a new approach. A more compassionate approach, one that recognized the dignity and worth of all people, no matter their nationality, religion, or background. "I appreciate your time today, Mr. President," Pope Prevost said, his voice breaking through Trump's reverie. "I know the path we discussed will not be easy, but the first step is always the hardest." Trump turned to face him, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know if I have all the answers, but I'm willing to try." The Pope smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "That is all anyone can ask, Mr. President. The world needs leaders who are willing to evolve, to listen, and to act with compassion. You have the potential to bring about great change. The question is whether you are willing to take that first step." Trump nodded slowly. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his responsibility as a leader in a new way. It wasn't just about making America great again. It was about making the world a better place, one step at a time. "Thank you, Your Holiness," Trump said, his voice more sincere than it had been all day. "I'll take your words to heart." As the meeting came to a close and the two men prepared to part ways, Trump couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't continue down the same path without considering the broader impact of his actions. The next few months would bring new challenges, new crises, and new opportunities. But now, Trump was ready to face them with a broader perspective. One that acknowledged the power of unity, the importance of compassion, and the need for global cooperation. The world would never know the full extent of the conversation between President Donald Trump and Pope Robert Prevost. Few would understand the quiet transformation that had taken place within the heart of the American leader. But the effects of their meeting would ripple across the globe in ways that no one could have predicted. In the weeks that followed, Trump's rhetoric began to shift. His speeches grew less combative, more focused on bringing people together rather than dividing them. He spoke often of unity, compassion, and the importance of building a future where no one was left behind. The national and global landscape had changed, and Trump, it seemed, was changing with it. Pope Robert Prevost, for his part, continued his mission to heal the divisions of the world, calling on leaders to embrace the values of service and compassion. His words resonated with millions, inspiring a new generation of leaders to take up the mantle of peace and justice. As for Trump, he would face the challenges of his presidency with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy. There were battles to fight, both at home and abroad. But with the lessons learned in that private meeting with Pope Prevost, he would be better prepared to lead, not just as a political figure, but as a servant of the people. The world was at a crossroads, and the leaders of the world, including President Donald Trump, now had a choice: to continue down the path of division and fear, or to embrace a future of unity, compassion, and understanding. The legacy of that fateful meeting, while hidden from the public eye, would serve as a guiding light for all those who sought to build a better world. In the years to come, as the world continued to grapple with the challenges of the 21st century, the words of Pope Robert Prevost would echo in the hearts of those who remembered that meeting. And perhaps in time, the world would see the fruits of that conversation, a world that was not divided by borders and ideologies, but united by a common desire to create a better future for all.